Hey, welcome to Draft Academy. My name is Mike. In this tutorial, I want to talk to you guys about using arrays in JavaScript. An array is basically a special type of JavaScript structure that allows you to store multiple values inside of it. And the most basic way to store a value in JavaScript is to use a variable. But generally, variables can only store one specific value, right? So a variable could store a string or it could store a number, but usually it can only store one string or one number. We can actually create something called an array, which is a special container, a lot like a variable, but the array container can hold multiple values. So I could hold like 2 or 3 strings or 2 or 3 numbers, or I could hold a couple strings and a couple numbers and maybe a Boolean. Arrays are a great way to store large amounts of information. So I'm going to show you guys how you can create an array, and then we'll talk about like working with arrays and doing a bunch of stuff with them. I'm actually going to create a variable, and I'm just going to call it fruits. And you'll notice that when you create an array, you create it a lot like you would a variable. So we can store an array inside of a variable like this, but it's a special type of variable. It's an array, and I can say equals, and I want to use this word new, and then I can type array. And now inside of here, I can pass this array some information. And basically we're just going to specify like what information we want this array to have. So what values do we want to store inside of it? So I can just pass in some strings. And so we have this fruits array. So I'll pass in some fruits. We can say like apples, oranges, and peaches. And so we now have this array, and we've passed into it a bunch of different values. So what I can do now is I can go over here to this document.write, and I can actually just print out this array. So I can say fruits, and now out on the screen we'll print this array. So it's printing out all of the values inside of that array, and it's pretty awesome. It works really well. So this is one way that we can create an array, but you'll notice that it's kind of like syntax heavy, right? We have to say new array, and then we need these like parentheses, and then we have to like, pass in all these values. There's actually another way that we can create an array, which is a lot easier in my opinion. Instead of saying new array, we can just create these square brackets, and then inside of these square brackets, we can just put all of these values. So then we don't have to say new array anymore. We can just create an array like this, and you'll see that it's the same thing, so it's doing the same thing. Now arrays are great because we're storing multiple pieces of information. So if I wanted, I could store something other than a string. I could store like a number, 24, and I could also store like a Boolean value. So I could say false. You can store all different types of data inside an array in JavaScript, and you see it all shows up just like that. So imagine if I wanted to access a specific piece of information from inside of this array. Well, I can do that by directly accessing it. So what I can do is after I say fruits here, I can make an open and closed square bracket, and then I can type in the index of the element in the array that I want to access. Now, arrays are indexed a lot like strings are indexed. So if you know how strings are indexed, you'll know that when we index a string, we start with 0. So if I was counting off all of the letters inside of this string, I would say 0, 1, 2, 3. And it's the same with arrays. So if I was to say, what's the 0th element in the array, it's going to be this. So I would say this apples is element 0, 24 is element 1, and false is element 2. So I start off with 0, 1, and 2. So if I wanted to access a specific element inside of this array, I can just access it by typing in the index. So I could say 0, for example, and now this will just give me apples. I could say 2, and this should give me false, right? It's giving me that third value. If I was to try to access something that's not inside of this array, then you'll see we get undefined because we haven't actually defined a 4th element or an element at the 3rd index position inside of this array. So that's how you can access individual elements in the array. You can also access specific properties about this array. So if I wanted, I could figure out like how many elements were inside of the array. I could say dot length, and what this will do is it'll print out how many items we have in this array. So it's going to print out 3 because we have 1, 2, 3 items. And when you're creating these arrays, if you wanted to make it a little bit more organized, you could also create them on multiple lines. So I could say like apples and then 24 down here and then false down here. And you can see this is like a little bit maybe better for us to create it. So we can create it on multiple lines, and JavaScript doesn't care. It's just gonna do the same thing. Another thing we can do with these arrays is we can actually modify some of the values inside of them. So if I wanted, I could change one of these values. So I could say over here, we can say fruits, and I can access an individual attribute. So I could say fruits, and we could say 0. And now what we can do is set it equal to something else. So I can say fruits 0 is equal to, and instead of apples, why don't we make this oranges? So now when I print out fruits 0, instead of getting apples like before, we're gonna get oranges because I've modified the value of this particular element in the array. So each element in the array can be thought of as like a variable in itself. So right here, I'm basically accessing a string variable. If I was to say fruits 1, and I could change this to like a different number, now I'm accessing a number variable. So that's kind of how you can modify values in an array. Another thing you can do is create an array from a comma separated list. So instead of defining like apples 24 false, if I had a string, so let's say I had a string and it was like comma separated, so I had apples, oranges, peaches, I can use a special string function. So I could say fruits, and then I could say dot split, and inside of here I can pass in what I want to split this up with. So I could say if I passed in a comma, this would actually split this entire string up into an array, and it would get its elements by figuring out where these commas are. So it would grab this element, and then it would see the comma, so it would know it has to grab another element, see the comma, it has to grab another element. So I can put in a comma in here, and now when I print out fruits 0, it should just be apples. And actually we need to set fruits equal to this. So I would say fruits is equal to fruits dot split, and now we'll get apples. So if I said like 2, we should get peaches. So that's kind of how you can split up an existing string into an array. So I could use a different delineator. I could use like, if I wanted, I could use an exclamation point, and now it'll do the same thing as long as I put exclamation point down here. So it'll split it up into an array based off of a particular delineator. So arrays are just a great way to store multiple values inside of a single container. And you can see over here, this container is called fruits, and then we're able to access that container and access the individual elements inside of that container using these square brackets. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe to Draft Academy to be the first to know when we release new content. Also, we're always looking to improve, so if you have any constructive criticism or questions or anything, leave a comment below. Finally, if you're enjoying Draft Academy and you want to help us grow, head over to draftacademy.com/contribute and invest in our future.